is Monday morning at 9 o'clock, although for me it's 5:48 Sunday afternoon. But I'm Brian. I'm the pastor here at Christ United Methodist Church. Love that. And you are here for another episode of PB Reads the Bible. Spoiler, I'm PB. So thank you for that. Thank you for joining that. We are halfway, or almost halfway through the book of Daniel. That's what we worked on this past week. That's what we're going to be working on this week. Today is episode 6 of that. We had one day of, excuse me, all background context stuff. And now today is chapter 5. So we're getting into chapter 5. Since I'm pre-recording this, I only have a half an hour. So I'm going to be moving through things. I'm going to try not to waste time. I want to make full use of this for you because time is valuable. Time is not money, but time is valuable. We only have so much of it to use, so we don't want to waste it. Just because I'm not live doesn't mean I don't want you to check in. So go ahead and check in, say something, and ask questions, make comments, whatever. I will be checking later. And also sometime this afternoon, for you this afternoon, I'm probably gonna be recording for Tuesday because I have at least half day Zoom meeting. So I won't be able to be live at 9 o'clock on Tuesday. Anyway, we're on chapter 5. And so far we've been, as we've gone through, Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon. But now we're going to be introduced to a different person, different alleged king, King Belshazzar. So real quick with history, he didn't exist. There's really no evidence that he exists, especially not as far as a child of Nebuchadnezzar. He might have been, there was someone with a similar name who was grandchild of Nebuchadnezzar, but he was never king. He never became king. It's also going to introduce someone called Darius the Mede. Nope, didn't happen. Not a real person. Not a real person. If anything, and the Mede Empire by this point was gone. It wasn't a real empire, a full empire by the actual historical. If this was a historical event, the Mede Empire was gone, and it would have been the Persians who were set to invade Babylon, and that would have been Cyrus was the king, not Darius. Not Darius the Mede. There was a Darius who was king of the Persian Empire. He comes after Cyrus, and again, since this is being written like 200 years after the fact, which is not a fact, I shouldn't have even said it that way. It's 200 years after the setting in which it is, allegedly taking place. It's mixing things in, and it's talking about some things that would indicate they have Darius in mind, Darius, however you want to pronounce his name, in mind. But the king at the time of the Babylon conquest would have been Cyrus. And Nabonidus was Nebuchadnezzar's son. What does all that mean? All that means is don't look at facts. When we know that the facts are wrong, we know it's a folk tale. We know it's folklore. And then we need to look for the truths rather than the fact. What truths does it point to? So this is another court tale of conflict. But it's a little bit different because the conflict isn't between the people we might think it is. And we'll get to that. But what I'm going to do is read through the story, then go back and touch on some points, okay? But we're gonna read through chapter 5, 31 verses. King Belshazzar made a great festival for 1,000 of his lords, and he was drinking the wine in the presence of the household of the thousand. I better start over. King Belshazzar made a great festival for 1,000 of his lords, and he was drinking wine in the presence of the 1,000. Under the influence of the wine, Belshazzar commanded that they bring in the vessels of gold and silver that his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. So they brought in the vessels of gold and silver that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. They drank the wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Immediately, the fingers of a human hand appeared and began writing on the plaster of the wall of the royal palace next to the lampstand. The king was watching the hand as it wrote. Then the king's face turned pale, and his thoughts terrified him. His limbs gave way, and his knees knocked together. The king cried aloud to bring in the enchanters, the Chaldeans, and the diviners. And the king said to the wise men of Babylon, whoever can read this writing and tell me its interpretation shall be clothed in purple, have a chain of gold around his neck, and rank third in the kingdom. Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or tell the king the interpretation. Then King Belshazzar became greatly terrified, and his face turned pale, and his lords were perplexed. The queen, when she heard the discussion of the king and his lords, came into the banqueting hall. The queen said, "O king, live forever. Do not let your thoughts terrify you or your face grow pale. There is a man in your kingdom who is endowed with the spirit of the holy gods. In the days of your father, he was found to have enlightenment, understanding, and wisdom like the wisdom of the gods. Your father, King Nebuchadnezzar, made him chief of the magicians, enchanters, Chaldeans, astrologers, and diviners, because an excellent spirit, knowledge, and understanding to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will give the interpretation." Then Daniel was brought in before the king. The king said to Daniel, "So you are Daniel, one of the exiles of Judah, whom my father the king brought from Judah? I have heard of you that a spirit of the gods is in you, and that enlightenment, understanding, and excellent wisdom are found in you. Now the wise men, the enchanters, who have been brought in before me to read this writing and tell me its interpretation, but they were not able to give the interpretation of the matter. But I've heard that you can give interpretations and solve problems. Now, if you are able to read the writing and tell me its interpretation, you shall be clothed in purple, have a chain of gold around your neck, and rank third in the kingdom." Then Daniel answered the king. Then Daniel answered in the presence of the king, "Let your gifts be for yourself, or give your rewards to someone else. Nevertheless, I will read the writing to the king and let him know the interpretation. O king, the Most High God gave your father Nebuchadnezzar kingship, greatness, glory, and majesty. And because of the greatness that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. He killed those he wanted to kill, kept alive those who he wanted to keep alive, honored those he wanted to honor, and degraded those he wanted to degrade. But when his heart was lifted up and his spirit was hardened so that he acted proudly, he was deposed from his kingly throne and his glory was stripped from him. He was driven from human society and his mind was made like that of an animal. His dwelling was with the wild asses. He was fed grass like oxen, and his body was bathed with the dew of heaven, until he learned that the Most High God has sovereignty over the king of mortals and sets over it whomever he will. And you, Belshazzar, his son, have not humbled your heart, even though you knew all this. You have exalted yourself against the Lord of heaven The vessels of his temple have been brought in before you, and you and your lords, your wives, and your concubines have been drinking wine from them. You have praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which do not see or hear or know, but the God in whose power is your very breath, and to whom belong all your ways, you have not honored. So from his presence, the hand was sent to, and this writing was inscribed. And this is the writing that was inscribed. Mene, Tekel, and Parsin. This is the interpretation of the matter. Mene, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Peres, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Then Belshazzar gave the command, and Daniel was clothed in purple. A chain of gold was put around his neck, and a proclamation was made concerning him that he should rank third in the kingdom. That very night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was killed. And Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. End of chapter. And again, Darius the Mede never existed. So a couple things right off the bat. Oh, and I should have said this too. It is folklore, right? It's folklore. Because would Daniel still be alive? Could he still be alive? This is like 60 some years. If he was still alive, he'd be at least 75 years old. Possible. Of course, anything is possible. But again, we shouldn't be looking at it as a historical thing. More reasons that we know it's folklore and stuff like that is the fact that whoever is king keeps calling for his wise men. They never can seem to solve the problem, and yet they keep their jobs and their heads. And someone needs to remind the king about Daniel. Now, if Daniel has been honored so much by Nebuchadnezzar, why isn't he in the courtroom? Why isn't he right with the king? Why isn't he one of the first? He should be the king's first call, you would think, right? No. It's to set up the conflict of this tale, because the conflict isn't a normal conflict. It's not a conflict between the king, between the king and Daniel, or between the king and God, or it is between these poor magicians, diviners, Chaldeans, astrologers, and Daniel. And not only Daniel, but God. And the fact that they can't solve the problem, can't solve it, know that they can't solve it. They're using all of their powers, using everything that they have of the world, using all of the world's knowledge. They can't solve it. It is only through a divine knowledge that Daniel has access to. So it's only through God that the problem can be solved. So there's the conflict, the tale of a court tale of conflict. Okay, so going into this, where is it taking place? It says it's taking place in a banqueting hall. In Aramaic, it literally means drinking house or something like that. So it's not a banquet hall like we would consider a banquet hall. This is a place just for bacchanalian extravagance. This is a place for orgies. This is a place for merely just for the sake of drinking and drinking to excess. And it mentions these different things that are there: his wives, his concubines. They use some obscure words, so we may not be 100% accurate on those translations, and we don't know what kind of ranking that might mean. However, into the room, and I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit in the story, but it ties in quickly. The queen comes. Now, we shouldn't think of this queen as being his wife. It probably wasn't. It's probably meant to be the queen mother, his mother. We say that, we think that, we almost know that because of the context of what then happens, and because of looking at it from, from the outside. When we look at the Esther story, Esther, even though she is his, the King Xerxes is actually, whatever, favorite wife, she can't just run into the room. She has to be called for. She has to be summoned. She risks her life by doing that. So since this one comes running in, just comes storming right into the room, must be his mom. She can get away with that. And she brings to his attention, she reminds him about all these things that had taken place before. Now, backing up a little bit, he has these items called for, brought out of the royal treasury, the holy vessels, the special worship implements that that Nebuchadnezzar had taken away and had put into a special vault and to show power, etc., etc. But he calls for them, he brings them out and just starts using them to drink out of and have everybody drink out of, and using them in some sort of a worship of foreign gods and of gods of gold and silver and wood and stone and bronze and all that kind of stuff. There are things that people put into the story that aren't there, but kind of sound like they would be cool or make sense to an extent. That the part of the point is that he wanted them to do something. He wanted the gods of gold and silver, and he's praying to them and wants them to do things, worshiping them, and they don't do anything, right? They're just there. But a hand shows up and starts writing on the wall. And it's not translated that way. It just says that he saw the hand. But I've read that it says he saw the palm of the hand. It's a little bit more particular, more literal. He saw the palm of the hand. Now, a couple things. Was the hand open like this? No, it almost makes more sense that the hand was like this, writing, right? If you're just using your finger to write in sand, you don't usually go like this, or on a wall. If you're marking, you're doing finger painting, you're holding your hand like this. So in order to see the palm of the hand, it was right over top of his head, writing on the wall right over the top of his head. So that's probably important. The author wanted that communicated in there, so to help heighten everything. And the author is using this wonderful description of what happens to him. His face changes color, and that's translated a couple different ways in different translations, and even within a particular translation here, it says it turns pale, it turns ashen, it turns color, because it's like everything that goes through and happens in his knees knocked together. What a vivid description of terror, right? Of absolute abject terror. It is wonderful. It's a great story. And it writes something on the wall, possibly right over top of his head. Now, and it says that they couldn't interpret it. They couldn't read it. So there's all kind of stuff as far as why and what was going on there. Some authors and says there's a Jewish tradition that says it was actually not written out as like regular words. It was written out in some form of a puzzle, and you had to be able to figure out the puzzle in order to read what the hand had written on the wall. Okay, that's pretty cool. One story says, one author says it was a cryptogram. Which I'm not exactly sure what a cryptogram is, but it's a puzzle, and that it was written on the wall in that way. So first you had to figure out the puzzle in order to figure out what the words were, in order to figure out what the words meant. So the king makes this great promise to Daniel, the same promise that he had given to the other so-called magicians, Chaldeans, astrologers, and diviners, that I will clothe you in purple and give you this gold chain, gold medallion, both of which would be symbols of power and authority and rule. And the gold chain also may have been something that would have been usable to perhaps imprint, might have been something that you used to stick into wax to document something, to seal something, almost like putting your signature or marking your X on something, that they could have used that. So probably would have had access to the royal vaults, to the bank account, to the king's bank account. None of them could do it, couldn't solve it. So he makes the same offer to Daniel. He calls Daniel in and says, same offer, exact same offer. You'll be the third person in line. Daniel says, I'll keep it. Keep it. It's interesting that he says that. Kind of like the way he says it too, or at least the way I hear him say it. The way I read it, and him saying it. Oh, just keep it to yourself, because he's angry. He is angry. So he doesn't jump right into the solution of the problem. He indicts the king. He says, your father, he messed up. He was bad, but he came around. God gave him the chance. He realized it. He turned around, and he even praised God. But you knew better. You knew better. You had all this knowledge. You didn't have to go through the same things that your father went through. But you didn't do it. But you didn't do it. So now I'll give you the interpretation. Now, the words that are listed in there, that's mene, tekel, and parsin. We don't really know. I mean, because it could be a couple different things because of Hebrew and Aramaic, actually Aramaic at this point. And there's different ways of looking at it. Now, Daniel's interpretation actually changes them from nouns to verbs, to verbs. Because in Aramaic and Hebrew, it would have been written down without vowels. So you throw vowels in, and if you throw certain vowels in, you can change. It means one thing, you put other vowels in, it could be something else. So by putting in certain vowels, Daniel reads them as verbs. And it's that numbered, weighed, and what was the last one? Numbered, weighed, and wanting. And wanting. But it's kind of like punning. They're actually puns. It's pun because he's playing with the words. When read as nouns, they're actually monetary units. They're actually monetary units. And I forget what. A mene is a pretty good sized coin, valuable coin. Tekel is possibly or probably an Aramaic translation of what in Hebrew would be the shekel. The shekel. And parsin is actually a half mene. So the mene is the most valuable. The tekel or the shekel would have been the least valuable, and the parsin is somewhere in between the two. It's a half a mene. So what does that mean? Well, they have theories on that too. But he changes them to the verbs, which probably have more meaning. Now the king does give Daniel all of everything he promised him, but like it doesn't really show any remorse, doesn't show anything, and it's too late. It's too late. He's killed that night as Darius the Mede conquers Babylon. The ultimate point is, especially for the people who are reading this and hearing this in the 3rd century BCE, and the people reading it in the 2nd century BCE under different tyrants, that no tyrant lives forever would be the ultimate thing. And God is still in control. God is still ultimately in control. Well, friends, I think our time is almost up, almost to that half hour, so I do have to stop. Again, I hope this has been beneficial to you. Keep your eyes and ears open to what God is doing in your life. When you see it, say, thanks, God, and then tell somebody. Until we meet again, my friends, be blessed.